Jaws is the incredible story of how a 28 years old, unknown director who had only made a TV movie, a few episodes for TV series, and one feature film, The Sugarland Express, which had a moderate success to say the least, ended up making the biggest box office hit in cinema history at the time of its release, earning over 50 times its total budget, thus creating the summer blockbuster, and now celebrating half a century of existence. Alright, I'm not here to tell you for the 100th time the story of the shark that didn't work when they put it in the water because of saltwater corrosion, turning a planned 55-day shoot into a 159-day nightmare, turning a $2 million budget into a whopping $9 million, and reducing the shark's screen time from the originally planned 40 minutes to less than 5 minutes in the final cut, forcing the young Steven Spielberg to throw away his entire storyboard and half of his script. I'm not going to talk about the moment when he considered replacing his mechanical shark with a great white either, which we can still see the remnants of in the underwater cage scene. Instead, I want to talk about something that almost never gets discussed, overshadowed by the sheer scale of the film's legend.
And they were always saying, the shark is not working. The shark is not working. Repeat, the shark is not working.
I want to talk about its hidden meaning, its symbolism, and the way Spielberg directed it, his mise-en-scène, which is a true masterclass in filmmaking. Okay, I won't be summarizing the plot as I assume you all saw it, but I will be spoiling it completely, so be warned. Alright, let's dive in. I'm Victor Norek, and this is Cinema. Jaws is really where the Steven Spielberg we know was born. Because after spending all of his TV movie Duel showing the evil truck, the film's main antagonist, which actually gives us a glimpse of what Jaws might have looked like had he been able to show the shark the entire time. Spielberg was forced to create fear by showing nothing, by pushing the audience to imagine the shark's presence. Both for us and the characters, the surface of the water becomes a giant screen onto which we can project our fears and anxieties. As a result, the shark is suggested just through two musical notes. A torn-away dog drifting back towards shore after a fisherman falls into the water, or even something as simple as a triangle. Whether it's the triangular fin of the real shark in the ocean, the cardboard triangle used by kids pretending there's a shark in the bay, the one painted in black on the amateur welcome sign, the one formed by the tooth stuck in a fishing boat, or even the triangular shape of the shark's head seen from below on the film's poster. Spielberg consistently refers to his terrifying creature only through substitutes, making the invisible feel tangible. Take the use of the yellow barrels, for instance. The one that the three main characters, Chief Brody, Hooper the oceanographer, and Quint the old sea captain, attach to the shark, marking its position around the boat without ever needing to show the animal. It's a stylistic device that would be reused countless times afterwards, all the way to the flags revealing the alien's presence in the clouds in Nope. This is the cinematic application of the literary figure known as synecdoche, something Spielberg would return to throughout his entire career, from the keys belonging to Keys, the antagonist in E.T., which are the only part of him we see for more than half the film, to the ripples in the glasses of water in Jurassic Park, signaling the incoming T-Rex. That would be used again in The Lost World. In Schindler's List, it's the smoke rising from the crematorium chimneys that evokes, without ever showing it, the entirety of the Holocaust. Or even a hat that becomes, on its own, the symbol of an adventurer. Because where in Duel he showed everything, leaving only the truck driver's face to our imagination, Jaws forces Spielberg to become a filmmaker of absence, of negative space. He discovered the art of delaying effects, which would lead in his very next film to the famous dolly-in shot on a character that's just looking at something. He began to hold back, to not play all his cards at once, making us wait as long as possible before revealing the iconic Devil's Tower in Close Encounters of the Third Kind, or the dinosaurs in Jurassic Park. It's about making us, the audience, imagine things ourselves, rather than handing them to us on a silver platter, all ready to eat like fast food. And all of these iconic images might never have existed if the shark had worked. So sometimes, constraints are actually a good thing.
So we see him in the sky, and so we don't see what he sees, but we do see that he's really Okay, so he's like almost losing his mind, right? Because what he is seeing is totally terrible. And then I'm gonna turn the camera so that we see it.
But what is Jaws really about in the end? Just to kill a shark? Well, of course not. Otherwise, we wouldn't still be talking about it half a century later, and I wouldn't be wearing theme socks today. Because, as is always the case with Spielberg, it's the characters that matter the most, above all else. And the fantastical or monstrous element only exists to confront them with their inner struggles. Take E.T. for example. The alien's presence allows Elliot to come to terms with his father leaving the family.
Maybe you ought to call your father and tell him about it.
I can't. He's in Mexico with Sally.
So the film recreates that separation by proxy, and Elliot is finally able to say to E.T. what he was never able to say to his father. In Jurassic Park, the entire adventure allows Alan Grant to evolve from someone who hates children.
I mean, what's so wrong with kids?
Oh, Ellie, look, they're noisy, they're messy, they're expensive.
Cheap.
They smell.
Who almost seems like he wants to kill them, to someone who holds them in his arms at the end. Just like the dinosaurs, who weren't supposed to be able to reproduce in the park.
There's no unauthorized breeding in Jurassic Park.
He too becomes a father, exactly like Ray Ferrier in War of the Worlds, who starts out as the worst father imaginable.
I'm allergic to peanut butter.
Since when?
Birth.
That's half what I got.
You're an asshole. Hate coming here.
Why you act like such a dick?
And whose encounter with the invaders, which coincide with the peak of the family's tensions, forces him to work on his role as a father, to risk his life for his children, and ultimately earn their love. That's why in all of Spielberg's films, symbolism always goes hand in hand with character evolution. Again in Jurassic Park, Alan Grant begins the film dressed in blue, while Ellie Sattler, his partner, wears pink, the traditional gender-coded colors. And just like the dinosaurs, who change sex over the course of the film,
some West African frogs have been known to spontaneously change sex from male to female in a single-sex environment. Life found a way.
They too will switch gender roles. Ellie ends up in blue, rolling up her sleeves and going after a raptor with a big gun, while Alan takes care of the children, the dust covering his blue shirt, eventually tinting it pink. And here in Jaws, this tendency towards symbolism is pushed even further, because the mise-en-scène, rather than aiming for realism, expresses the inner state of its main character. Let's look at the film's pivotal scene. Brody is sitting in his beach chair, watching the swimmers, anxious that a second shark attack might happen after having recommended to close down the beaches, a decision that the town's mayor refused, too concerned with the financial consequences.
Amity is a summer town. We need summer dollars.
A man comes up to talk to Brody and blocks his field of vision. What's unique about this shot is that Spielberg uses a split diopter, a kind of special lens that's split in half, like half a magnifying glass, that's put over the actual camera lens, that allows two different focal points, two opposing depths of field, to coexist in the same shot. One in the distance, and the other very close to the camera, both being still in focus. Normally that wouldn't be possible, because when you focus on something very close to the camera, even by stopping down the aperture a lot, the distant subject becomes blurry, and vice versa, the close subject becomes blurry while the distant one comes into focus. Just check out my What's a Good Director video to know more about all this stuff. So here we have a frame that's essentially split in two. On the left, there's a deep focus with depth of field, and on the right, a very shallow focus and no depth of field, with the ocean getting blurred. And on top of that, there's a radio playing in the background, reinforcing with sound the visual obstruction. Brody sees nothing, he hears nothing. His surveillance is disrupted from every direction. And this feeling is conveyed purely through the mise-en-scène, which, like I said, instead of depicting reality, expresses an idea, reflecting the character's inner state. Brody is literally trying to focus on two things at once. The ocean on one side, with the exceptional nature of the shark attack from the day before in the water, and on the other side, this man complaining about parking issues, so his everyday job as a sheriff on land. Which is an impossibility because the two are fundamentally contradictory. But it goes even further than that. These everyday problems echo those of the mayor, who actually looks a lot like this man and who refuses to close down the beaches. The mayor only has a very short-term vision, a superficial understanding of things, exactly like what we see on the right side of the frame. While Brody sees much further, like on the left side of the image, because he's trying to protect the townspeople. So you have depth on one side, surface on the other. perfectly blending form and content. Everything seems to be happening inside Brody's mind, and the mise-en-scène expresses this interiority, this subjective way of looking at things. Look at all these continuity breaks. The radio, the woman, and the objects in the shack seem to disappear as the scene goes on, leaving Brody alone in the shot. Spielberg shows him emptying his mind to concentrate better. He even loses the notion of time as his watch disappears as well. This can only be intentional from Spielberg. And we have the exact same idea later on in that same scene, again through a purely optical effect, when little Alex is attacked. This is the famous dolly zoom, which is borrowed from Alfred Hitchcock's Vertigo, where the camera moves forward while the operator zooms out, thus stretching the background behind Brody and creating a sense of vertigo. This effect actually reverses the depth of field values we were just talking about. And like the split diopter, it happens within one single shot, shifting from a very shallow depth of field to a huge one that seems to be swallowing up Brody. The entire mise-en-scène is built on purely optical effects created by the camera, reinforcing the idea that, just like Brody in his chair and the spectator in their seat, throughout the entire first half of the film, the characters are powerless, and all they can do is watch the horror unfolding before them, with their gaze as their only weapon, left to wonder who the next victim might be. But this idea of vision, of looking, is actually there from the very first shot, which is a subjective POV shot of the shark, what he's seeing, accompanied by John Williams' leitmotif. So from the very first image, we associate the POV shot with the shark. And actually the first attack reinforces that, because it uses the same music and the same imagery that looks like a POV. However, later on, Spielberg will contradict everything he built up until then. Because in this beach scene, he introduces underwater shots that also look like POV, but that don't belong to the shark. Because at that moment, there's nothing there. It's just the two kids with their fake fin pretending there's a shark in the bay. And in that scene, we also get direct-to-camera looks from the swimmers, again suggesting a subjective camera. But it doesn't belong to the shark either, since there is no shark. They're not looking at anything, maybe just a fake fin from which we would get the POV? But then, right after that, we get another look into the camera, and this time it's the real shark behind that POV. So in the end, as a viewer, we never really know whether to trust the subjective camera device or not. It's exactly like in Halloween, which came out 3 years later, where after opening with a subjective shot as well, John Carpenter starts playing with that device, so that the audience never quite know whether the shot belonged to Michael Myers' point of view or not. In that regard, terror can then emerge from anywhere within the frame, suggesting that evil is everywhere. But with Spielberg, the idea is slightly different. Here, this constant need for us to question what the mise-en-scène is telling us becomes an extension of the fact that the characters themselves must question authority. In this case, the mayor, who insists on keeping the beaches open against all common sense, even though the threat is real and people have died. So, in the face of these lies and manipulations, everyone, both the characters and the audience, have to question the authority's narrative. And since the director is the only true master on board on a film, question him. Just as Quint, the boat's captain, also lies, preventing Brody's wife from reaching him on the boat.
Your husband's all right, Mrs. Brody. He's fishing. He just got a couple of stripers. We'll bring him in for dinner. We won't be long. We haven't seen anything yet. Don't get out.
And fun fact, the Coast Guard's voice at that moment is Spielberg himself.
I have Mrs. Martin Brody here.
And Quint will also later sabotage their equipment to prevent them from contacting the shore, putting them in danger, just like the mayor did, who, like Spielberg, also made images lie.
Well, what else could have done that to that girl? Boat propellant?
Yes, a boating.
That's not what you told me over the phone.
A summer girl goes swimming. She tires, fishing boat comes along.
Probable boating accident. This was no boat accident. Did you notify the Coast Guard about this?
No, it's only local jurisdiction.
This idea that you always have to search for the truth beneath the surface runs throughout the film. Just as Brody and Hooper dig for the truth inside the guts of the false culprit, the shark that the mayor has hung up for display, only to prove that it does not contain the remains of little Alex, the one who was killed on his inflatable raft. But this whole idea was already there at the beginning of the film, just after the opening sequence. In this scene, the phone's ringing in the sheriff's kitchen to let him know about the young woman's death. In the background, we have his wife washing their son's bloodied wound under running water.
Mom, I got cut. I got hit by a vampire.
So the background visually mixes blood and water, foreshadowing on a thematic level what the phone call is about to reveal to Brody. He moves toward the receiver in the foreground and picks it up, but the ringing continues. He hangs up, then picks up another receiver located underneath the first one, most likely his professional line since he's the sheriff. a phone that was invisible to us, hidden off screen. This single shot encapsulates all of the film's stakes, everything that's to come. It tells us that we assume that what's making the noise we hear is what's prominently displayed in the foreground, the thing we're looking at, just like the shark publicly displayed by the mayor. But that's wrong. The threat comes from below, the other shark, invisible, hidden by the mise-en-scène, lurking beneath the frame, continuing its own call, its own ringing, the notes of John Williams. Surface on one side, depth on the other. But as a matter of fact, we already had this same idea to question what we're being shown earlier in that very scene. Because the very first shot of Brody is presented like a duel between him and the ocean, knowing that his defining trait is his fear of water.
You don't go in the water at all, do you?
Spielberg frames him as if he's alone, facing this vast expanse, his sworn enemy. Except he's not alone at all. He's safe inside his house, sitting on his bed. Another optical illusion, quite literally, created through the use of a lens with a long focal length. And actually, we already had this as early as the film's second shot, because Spielberg presents to us in close-ups the two young people flirting at the party on the beach, the young woman being the first victim. And in those shots, we get the impression that they're physically close to each other, the smoke from the guy's cigarette echoing the smoke in front of the girl, as if they were the same. But they're not close. Not at all. The smoke came from a trash can, their eye lines did not match, he was looking over there and she was looking in front of her, and what happened to those guys? Nothing matches. This way, throughout the film, Spielberg subtly conditions us, almost unconsciously, to constantly question what we're seeing, because it's always more complex than it appears. And that's precisely how Jaws fits perfectly within the cinema of its time, the 1970s, which is an era marked by paranoia and distrust of authority, right in the midst of the Vietnam War, a war that served no purpose at all and was impossible to win.
Ike, Kennedy, Johnson, they violated the Geneva Convention, they lied to Congress and they lied to the public. They knew we couldn't win and still sent boys to die.
What about Nixon?
He's just carrying on like all the others.
That was also during the Watergate scandal, where Nixon was caught lying and forced to resign. All of this coming after the Kennedy assassination, which many believe was orchestrated by the CIA, just 1 year after the suspicious death of his mistress, Marilyn Monroe.
Happy birthday, Mr. President.
In 1970s cinema, images lie, and you have to look beyond their surface to uncover what they hide beneath. Just like the fake fin that stops exactly at the surface of the water, a surface that can hide the real shark. And seeing beneath the surface is exactly what Hooper does with his sonar on his boat, just as he dives below the surface to inspect what the drifting fishing boat contains. Or when they cut open the shark, searching its insides, which is precisely what the mayor refused to allow.
This is not the time or the place to perform some kind of a half-assed autopsy on a fish.
The mayor prefers to stick to the two-dimensional image of the shark that will make the front page of the newspaper in his postcard Perfect Town, the same town that we will see the name of on the two-dimensional welcome billboard. Throughout the film, we constantly find this idea of two-dimensional representations versus three-dimensional reality, a depth that must be explored, whether it's the shark in the Killer Shark arcade game, or the one drawn in chalk on the board, which directly mirrors the film's final scene, with Quint besides it, the very man who will end up in the shark's jaws. Similarly, almost every image in the book Brody flips through ends up becoming real. The hole in the hull of the fishing boat, the shark with an oxygen tank in its mouth, a cruise in through the jaws of a shark, a lookout perch high above watching the beach, and the same goes for the Amity billboard. The swimmer in a red bathing suit lying on a yellow inflatable raft foreshadows little Alex, also wearing red, lying on a yellow raft with a shark behind him. And this idea of representation and reality blending together runs throughout Spielberg's entire body of work. Well, obviously there's the park logo in Jurassic Park, which is also the film's logo, where you're never quite sure whether the characters are talking about the park or the movie, especially since they literally sit down to watch Jurassic Park in a movie theater, and that you can find the actual real book of the making of Jurassic Park inside of the film. But it goes all the way back to the beginning of his career, when he staged the reveal scene of his TV movie Savage inside a film studio, even turning the camera around on itself. Or in another TV movie, Something Evil, in which from the very first shots, the boundary between drawing and reality dissolves, layering the script with a film within a film, with actresses dubbing other actresses, leaving us to no longer know where reality ends and where fiction begins. just like in Ready Player One, where Wade's team tricks the villain into thinking he's in the real world, when he's still inside the virtual reality. Same goes for the episode Spielberg directed for his series Amazing Stories, The Doll, where a drawing becomes real and saves the day. And in The Fabelmans, Sam, Spielberg's avatar, can only cope with his parents' separation by imagining himself filming the scene. So in that moment, Spielberg is literally filming himself filming, all within a mirror, folding the film onto itself in a meta spiral. And we can find this same idea in a less surreal form in Empire of the Sun, where Jamie, to remember his parents by, carries around a Norman Rockwell painting, a painting that Spielberg had previously recreated within that reality, symbolizing how Jamie's world turned into fiction the moment he quite literally steps behind the camera and enters a giant Gone with the Wind poster. He crosses the line into fiction, because he spent the whole beginning of the film as a spectator, watching framed images through the window of his chauffeur-driven car. So in the second act of the film, he finds himself on the other side of that screen, from the one who frames to the one who is framed, already separated from his parents in that beautiful shot. And he'll spend the rest of the film trying to cross that boundary again, passing under fences, behind curtains, always separated from others by some kind of screen. He keeps trying to get back behind that original screen formed by the car window, until he ends up sleeping on a doorstep in an in-between space, neither on one side nor the other. And this idea of fiction that is seen through a screen lies at the very core of Spielberg's cinema. It's the T-Rex breaking the barrier between spectator and spectacle, the raptor overlapping with its own representation, or crossing to the other side of the screen, literally. It's Leonardo DiCaprio in Catch Me If You Can, seeing the fantasy of the child he could have been in his mother's new house, always within a framed performance, watched through a screen. As he superimposed reality in fiction when, after seeing James Bond in a movie theater, he started dressing like him and driving the same car. As he learns to be a lawyer watching TV, replicating what he'd seen. And the same goes when he chose to impersonate a doctor, superimposing him with what he sees through screens and wants to become. He takes the place of what he sees, like in this shot where Spielberg breaks the 180-degree rule to substitute the character with what he wants. And all that in a film that began inside a TV set, warning us that it would blend reality and fiction, the true story of a man who lies all the time. In Minority Report, John Anderton watches images projected onto a two-dimensional screen, before crossing through a screen to the other side, only to relive those same images in 3 dimensions, for real. That exploration of the third dimension is the very foundation of the adventures of Tintin's Mise-en-scène, which constantly recreates comic book panels and frames within frames, from which Tintin keeps trying to break free, questioning his own representation from his very first shot, where he gets drawn by Hergé, the original cartoonist of the Tintin comic books. But these oppositions, 2D versus 3D, reality versus fiction, surface versus depth, are all reinforced by the other contrasts running through the film. Like the first half takes place on land, while the second half is on the water. On one side you have a territorial shark beneath the sea.
It's called territoriality.
And on the other, on land, a mayor fighting for his town, just as territorial as the shark. There's also a clash between 2 elected figures, the mayor and the sheriff, politics on one side, law enforcement on the other, each with opposing views on what the law should be. It's actually something that Spielberg expresses visually, because even though Brody is in a hurry, he carefully walks within the lines of the crosswalk, while the mayor blatantly stands outside of them. Discipline on one side, shady maneuvering on the other. A tension between action and reflection within a film whose central theme is humanity versus nature, a nature that's reminding us that we are nothing more than just a link in the food chain. And all of these conversations opposing safety and profit reflect that this small seaside community is just a small island facing a vast continent. So while the sheriff tries to move things forward, the mayor remains stuck in his position. And once again, this is expressed through the mise-en-scène. Look at that, the mayor forbids Brody from closing down the beaches in a 2-minute long take that's set on a ferry. So between 2 shores, between 2 possible decisions. And yet the camera remains completely still, embodying the fact that the mayor is not moving an inch on his decision. And another long take, 3 minutes this time, develops this idea further, yet with another discussion about closing down the beaches. The characters are moving in a sort of choreographed dance around the large Amity Welcome billboard, which, defaced with graffiti, becomes the opposite of what it claims to represent. This town is nothing more than a postcard image, supposedly idyllic when in reality it's barely alive for 3 months out of the year and drops dead in the off-season.
Look, we depend on the summer people here for our very lives.
Spielberg reveals its true nature by scratching away at this glossy surface the mayor is so desperate to preserve. And the mayor himself is nothing but an image. Look at that, he constantly has a cigarette hanging from his lips, but it's never lit, always brand new, symbolizing his absolute superficiality. The image we project to others is always a lie. This ghost town only exists and survives through tourism, so its promotional image must be preserved through staging, through performance.
Nobody's going in. Please, gentlemen.
It's no coincidence that the arrival of tourist on Amity is filmed like the opening of a curtain on the theater stage, or like a cinema screen. The town quite literally becomes that postcard the mayor is fighting so hard to maintain, just as artificial as a film set. The beach is overrun with journalists who start speaking directly to the camera, once again questioning point of view and subjectivity. Behind them, young people wave enthusiastically at the camera, blurring the boundaries between reality and fiction once again. All the more that the journalist addressing us directly is played by Peter Benchley, the very author of the Jaws original novel, once again folding the film in on itself, highlighting the artificiality it seeks to interrogate. That's how this film fits perfectly into its era, by exposing the decay of the United States through its own publicity imagery, by scratching beneath the surface of the screen to reveal the rot that's underneath. An advertisement facade that Spielberg would continue to explore in his very next film, Close Encounters, where the arrival of extraterrestrials and the artistic impulse they awaken in people causes the McDonald's signs to go dark and drives the main character to break free from all social convention, literally tearing apart his pre-80s, pre-Reagan suburban house under the puzzled gaze of his neighbors, abandoning the values of the nuclear family to set off into the unknown. Everything in Jaws seems to be constantly digging into this idea of surface versus depth, what lies beneath, within. And that's one of the main reasons Spielberg shot all the water sequences at water level, in between, as he explains so himself.
I really wanted this movie to be just at water level. We see water like this, and that's why I shot at least, I'd say, 25% of the movie from that water box that Bill Butler reconfigured for us.
But what's the act of digging beneath the surface for a human being? Digging into our own off-screen space. It's exploring our subconscious, our inner demons. Demons that the characters quite literally lay all out on the table as they reveal their scars during the long conversation aboard the Orca. Traumas that have left visible marks even when they tried to hide them.
What's that one?
Oh, well, it's a tattoo. I got that removed.
For Hooper, it's a shark attack he survived at the age of 12, the very thing that sparked his passion. For Quint, it's the death of nearly 1,000 fellow sailors, eaten by sharks after the USS Indianapolis, the ship that delivered the atom bomb to Japan, sank, and the crew waited for days before getting rescued. A reflection on the human cost of the atom bomb, a theme Spielberg would continue to explore throughout his career, from Empire of the Sun to Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. The haunting images of Bridge of Spies, where it's shown to kids in class, and even through the picture of Oppenheimer in Jurassic Park. Hooper and Quint have managed to purge their demons, or at least channel them, both making sharks the center of their lives. But Brody has no real scars, except for his appendectomy, making it a visual joke for us. Nothing has ever been externalized in him. He keeps his fear of water buried inside, simmering like a pressure cooker ready to explode. And that's exactly what the shark is for. To embody the sum of all of his fears so that he can finally confront them and ultimately destroy them in a final act of catharsis. That's also why in the beginning he stands in complete opposition with the two other characters. Hooper and Quint are free, unattached, both living most of their lives at sea. Brody, on the other hand, is anchored to land, and everything about him reflects that. The decor of his house echoes the yellow of sand. From the curtains to the wallpaper, to his kitchen utensils, his furniture, even his dog, he wears ochre-colored clothing. His eyes and hair carry the brown tones of the earth. Even his sheriff's car has that same hue, when in the United States they're usually black and white. He stands in complete contrast to Hooper and Quint, who both have blue eyes and are dressed entirely in blue, tying them visually to the ocean. That same yellow color is associated with those who remain on land while their loved ones die at sea. That's the hat and beach bag of Alex's mother, or the yellow shirt of the man whose dog is eaten by the shark. Likewise, Alex's inflatable raft, the thing that floats on the surface of the water, and the last thing that's left of him, is yellow. Just like the raft of the woman on the poster, like the sun and the boats, well, everything that's above water. It's also the color of the barrels used to keep the shark in the surface, preventing it from disappearing into the blue of the ocean. Nothing is left to chance. Look at that. The mayor, who claims control over both land and sea, alternates between a blue and yellow striped suit and a jacket decorated with anchors, with a blue and yellow striped tie. Because anchors are the objects that literally connect what's above and what's below the water. Through these costumes, he presents himself as ruling over both realms, just as territorial as the shark. But ultimately, the mayor isn't the only one Brody must confront and overcome, because Quint, by removing his prosthetic tooth, is explicitly associated with a shark who also had a missing tooth. The two are even mirrored when we see him for the first time, both shown eating. Quint represents pure instinct. He's the old sailor who has it in his blood and never questions anything. He stands in opposition to Hooper, who thinks, analyzes, and uses science to fight the shark. In the end, that's the real deeper meaning of Jaws. It's psychotherapy on a cinematic scale, exactly what Spielberg himself has always done.
I've avoided therapy because movies are my therapy.
So throughout the film, Brody's anxieties seem to become reality, materializing into the shark. He's scared for his son playing on a dock? Bam! In the very next scene, the shark destroys a dock. He's scared for his son swimming in the water? Bang! The shark immediately kills little Alex, who looks just like him. As a matter of fact, the biggest changes Spielberg made to the original novel are precisely about this. First of all, he made Brody afraid of water.
You don't go in the water at all, do you?
Where you going?
We gotta find him right now. He's a night feeder.
On the water?
And secondly, he made Brody a newcomer. He's not from Amity like in the book. In the film, he fled from New York and his marital problems, hoping that a change of scenery would change everything. But he finds himself facing the exact same issues in Amity, only multiplied by the arrival of the shark, which becomes the catalyst of it all.
Your husband's home.
Yes.
I'd really like to talk to him.
Yes, so would I.
Crime rate in New York will kill you. Violence, muggings. Kids can't leave the house. You gotta walk them to school.
But in the end, that's exactly what happens in Amity too. He has to constantly watch over his children to make sure that they don't die. You never escape who you used to be. Because even in Amity, Brody remains a New Yorker.
I just want to know one simple thing. When do I get to become an islander?
Ellen, never. Never. You're not born here. You're not an island.
The film tells us that you can't run away from your demons. You always carry them with you, anticipating 50 years of horror films that would revolve around that very idea.
I liked that it was a movie about trauma.
It's a movie about trauma.
It's a movie about trauma.
The movie is about trauma. You know, generational trauma.
Generational trauma.
Generational trauma.
Yeah.
Trauma.
Trauma. Trauma. Trauma.
So Brody moved from the oppressive verticality of New York to the absolute horizontality of the ocean, which his house overlooks. But like in all the film's images, that horizontality is in fact deceptive, because the very presence of the shark introduces a vertical dimension to it. The threat comes from below, bringing back the verticality Brody thought he had finally escaped. When the film was released, Spielberg said, "Jaws is not a big spectacle. It's a very small film revolving around one single idea. There is no place in the world where you're completely safe." And he expresses this through a dissolve between the eerie calm of the ocean after the first victim's death into the ocean seen through Brody's bedroom window, linking the external horror to the inner turmoil of his house. In a normal shark movie, you're supposed to be safe as long as you stay out of the water. But here, the house itself feels like it's under siege, attacked from all sides. First from the light that's coming in from outside. The very first line Brody speaks in the film is actually him complaining about it.
How come the sun didn't used to shine on you?
To his son's injury, which happens outside in the yard.
In Amity, you say yad.
Sorry, the yard. And then the phone is ringing, constantly interrupting conversations, making everything a chaotic blur. The outside world feels like a constant assault on Brody. Yet he's surrounded by it. He's living on an island with water all around him. He's trapped by his deepest fear. And so all of these aggressions ultimately take shape in the shark's attacks. Just like in Duel, where the killer truck replayed the sexual assault the main character's wife experienced the night before, while he just stood by, powerless to help her.
I mean, I think you could have at least said something to the man last night. I mean, after all, he was practically trying to rape me in front of that whole party.
The entire duel between the massive truck and the frail driver, a true David versus Goliath dynamic, David actually being the guy's name, is an extension of that very trauma. And the link between the killer shark and the killer truck even becomes explicit with the license plate found inside the shark's stomach. License plates being what the truck seemed to collect from its victims.
In Duel, you hear the sound from an old bee dinosaur picture. And I used the very same sound effect in Jaws, almost as a bit of just a reminder that there was a kinship between both stories.
And actually, this is a sound taken from the T-Rex in The Land Unknown. The shark forces Brody to confront his demons, because otherwise his marital problems would likely have led him to abandon his family, just as Roy Neary would do in Close Encounters of the Third Kind, Spielberg's very next film 2 years later. So Brody's territory gradually shrinks, forcing him to face his fear. He goes from the island of Manhattan to the island of Amity, to the Orca, which eventually capsizes and slowly sinks, and he still tries to avoid the water and climbs onto the mast. His space seems to be shrinking more and more. Little by little, every barrier between him and the ocean collapses. Starting with the first one, the window of his bedroom, in that initial duel with the ocean, which returns halfway through the film, but this time, through a slow zoom in towards the horizon, Spielberg frees Brody from the boundaries that framed both the image and his mind, marking his decision to finally go out to sea, to confront his enemy, to move from spectator to actor, to cross over to the other side of the screen, which he does quite literally right before going out to sea. Just as later on, the shark will break through that very window, that screen that once separated him from the ocean. Separation between Brody and the ocean that was also shown through yet another bifocal lens. And to show you that all this symbolism is carefully planned, here's something that no one notices. When the shark breaks that screen for the first time with one of the barrels, that same barrel a second later will knock out the glasses from Brody's face, glasses he had been wearing throughout the whole film, which were another screen in front of his eyes, between him and his fears. All the screens are knocked down one by one. And that's all purely symbolic, because he'd actually really need those glasses in order to make the amazing shot he does at the end. But he had to lose them, to symbolically have nothing left between him and the water, nothing that would put him even remotely as a spectator, because glasses are also named spectacles. It's what you see spectacle with. So it's only when he forces himself to face the shark, combining two opposing figures, that he manages to defeat it. Using Quint's rifle, the man of action, and Hooper's oxygen tank, the man of science. Bringing together death, the rifle, and life, the oxygen. He unites the two extremes of his internal conflict to finally confront, face to face, the monster that haunts his subconscious, where before he had his back turned to it. He achieves his catharsis. A burst of water splashes him for the very first time in the film, and finally he dives into the water and makes his way back to shore, free at last. Now dressed in the blue of the ocean, but carried out by the yellow, sand-colored barrels, finally uniting surface and depth, land and sea. And in the final shot, those two colors are perfectly interwoven, the blue ocean on the left and the yellow sand on the right. The two men reaching land in a wide shot that fully integrates Brody into this landscape where he has finally found his place. His journey coming full circle with his final line.
I used to hate the water.
Well, that was my analysis, my breakdown of Jaws and its amazing mise-en-scène. I really hope you liked it. A lot of this comes from the books I wrote about the cinema of Steven Spielberg, which unfortunately are only in French for now. But if this channel works, my editor will have them published in English as well. So please like, subscribe, boost, and most of all, comment and share. This channel is brand new, so I really need your help for it to work out. Thank you for watching. I think this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship. I'll be back, for sure.